Marcus Hale had built his empire on ruthless decisions. At 42, he was one of the most feared real estate moguls in New York City, a man who had razed entire neighborhoods to erect gleaming towers that scraped the clouds. He had learned long ago that sentiment was a weakness, that business demanded ice in your veins and stone in your chest. He had mastered both. His black SUV pulled up to the crumbling building on Elmwood Street that Tuesday morning, a modest four-story walk-up that his development company had acquired 3 months ago. The tenants had all received their eviction notices. Most had already left. Today was the final day, and Marcus had come personally because the last remaining tenant had refused every notice. Every warning, every legal document slipped under the door. His lawyers had advised against coming himself, but Marcus had grown impatient. He liked to close things personally. He stepped out of the car, straightened his charcoal suit, and walked toward the entrance with his assistant, Daniel, hurrying beside him, clutching a clipboard. The building smelled of old wood and rain and something faintly floral, like lavender mixed with quiet desperation. Marcus climbed the stairs to apartment 3B, the source of all the delay. He knocked once firmly, the knock of a man who expected the door to open immediately. There was a pause, the sound of shuffling feet, and then the door swung open. Marcus Hale froze, standing before him in a pale yellow cardigan, her dark hair threaded with silver strands she didn't have 9 years ago. Holding a cardboard box of books against her hip was Elena. His Elena, the woman he had married at 26, when he had nothing but ambition and borrowed confidence. The woman who had stood beside him through 3 failed ventures and 1 brutal bankruptcy before the tide finally turned. The woman he had divorced at 33 when success arrived, and he convinced himself he had outgrown her. She looked at him with eyes that did not soften, did not widen in panic, did not beg. She simply looked at him the way you look at old weather, something you once stood in and no longer fear. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady, almost indifferent. He could not speak for a full 4 seconds. Daniel glanced between the two of them, sensing something enormous and invisible filling the narrow hallway. "Elena," Marcus finally said, and the word came out stripped of every armor he had worn up the stairs. "You live here?" It was not a question. It was a man realizing the shape of something terrible. "I have lived here for 3 years," she said simply, shifting the box on her hip. "I received your company's notices. I wasn't sure if you knew. I assumed you didn't." The assumption was generous, and they both knew it. She had given him the grace of ignorance, even when she likely suspected the truth. Marcus looked past her into the small apartment. It was immaculate despite its age. The windowsill lined with small potted herbs, a child's drawing tacked neatly to the refrigerator. His eyes stopped there. A child's drawing. "My daughter," Elena said quietly, following his gaze. "She's 7. She's at school." Marcus stepped back slightly as though the air had thinned. He knew Elena had remarried briefly and that it had ended. He had heard fragments through the years. The way you hear news about a life you exiled yourself from. He had never allowed himself to ask more. He looked at the drawing. A woman with dark hair and a little girl with pigtails, standing in front of a building that looked exactly like this one, labeled in crooked letters, "Home." Something cracked open in Marcus Hale's chest. Something he had been welding shut for nearly a decade. He had evicted hundreds of tenants. He had signed thousands of papers without flinching. He had told himself every time that this was progress, that someone else would have done it anyway, that the city moved forward and sentiment moved no one. But standing in this hallway, looking at a child's drawing of the only home she had ever known, drawn by the daughter of the woman he had once promised to protect, Marcus understood for the first time the full weight of what his ruthlessness had cost. Not just Elena, not just this child, but himself. "You're not leaving," he said. Elena raised an eyebrow, cautious, not yet willing to trust the words. "Marcus, you're not leaving," he repeated. And his voice was different now, quieter, heavier with something genuine. "I'll have the legal team remove this building from the development plan. I'll transfer the deed. You'll own this apartment." Elena stared at him for a long moment. "I don't want your charity," she said firmly. "It isn't charity," Marcus said. "It's the first right thing I've done in a very long time." He turned and walked back down the stairs without waiting for a response, pulling out his phone to call his lawyers before he reached the bottom step. Behind him, Elena stood in the doorway holding her box of books. And for the first time in years, something in her expression quietly, carefully, began to heal. If this story moved something in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Stories, where every story reminds us that it is never too late to choose compassion over cruelty.